Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Watson. I'm here from theonering.com, and I'm here along with Michael Grumbine and Daniel Coates. And today we're going to be going through Chapter 8 of the Silmarillion of the Darkening of Valinor, as Melkor wreaks his havoc, his first real deep havoc on Middle-earth, and we start seeing some of the fruit that bears. But before we do, I wanted to let you know lately that we've been doing more than just podcasts, actually. We have a YouTube channel, and on that YouTube channel, we've been posting shortish videos that mostly go over The Rings of Power, Amazon's new upcoming series. We review different images, the trailer, anything new that's coming out between now and when we post this podcast. So go over there, take a look. You can look for us on there. Probably the best way to find us is actually just go to theonering.com/YouTube, and it'll forward you right to our channel. You'll be able to get there without having to wade through anything else through YouTube search. So theonering.com/YouTube. Head over there, subscribe, like some videos. That helps us get more viewers, increases the community, and we really want to start doing a whole lot more when it comes to, already we have such a great following of folks listening and viewing what we have. So help us out. Give us a thumbs up. Give us that 5-star review. And normally today, we would jump into All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter, but we don't have that ready today. So we're just going to jump right into the Silmarillion. And the way we start with that of the Darkening of Valinor is with
Dan's Big Thought.
My big thought. This is a little hard for me today. So, of the Darkening of Valinor, obviously we have a new character. We have Ungoliant, which you guys helped me pronounce before we started recording. And so we have this big, giant spider character, and that weaves webs of darkness and is going to help Melkor attack the place of the Blessed Realm, basically. And one of the details that jumped out at me reading this for the first time is that even though this character is all about darkness and weaving webs of darkness around her, that at the same time she desires the light. She hungers and lusts, and she's desirous and covetous of getting more light, and she can't get enough of it. And so that detail really jumped out at me, where they're creeping towards the Blessed Realm, and Tolkien writes, she hungered for light and hated it. And so that really jumped out at me. So also, I promised Jonathan Watson before we started recording, I would say my big thought was that Tolkien was sexist in making Ungoliant a woman.
There it is.
Yeah, so that'll be the thumbnail or the title. So, we can talk about that too. But I thought I would read a C.S. Lewis quote. This is from Mere Christianity, where he says, "Wickedness, when you examine it, turns out to be the pursuit of some good in the wrong way." And he goes on to elaborate. You can be good for the mere sake of goodness. You cannot be bad for the mere sake of badness. You can do a kind action when you're not feeling kind and when it gives you no pleasure, simply because kindness is right. But no one ever did a cruel action simply because cruelty is wrong, only because cruelty was pleasant or useful to him. In other words, badness cannot succeed even in being bad in the same way in which goodness is good. Goodness is, so to speak, itself. Badness is only spoiled goodness, and he concludes by saying evil is a parasite, not an original thing. And I wasn't really sure how to connect those in my head, but something jumped out at me that Ungoliant desires the light and hates it. And
it seems the connection is she desires, the cruelty is what gives her. Can you read that cruelty line? What was the line from that? Because that's what jumped out at me, is that you do it. You engage in cruelty because it is pleasant, right?
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah, no one ever did a cruel action simply because cruelty is wrong, only because cruelty was pleasant or useful.
useful. And I think that's sort of the tie-in. Even though she hates the light, to her, the ability for her to remove the light from the world is more pleasant than any pain that it causes her. That's at least that's the way that maybe that's the way that I tie it into. But
Yeah.
like she wants a darkened world, right? The webs she weaves are always dark. It's the dark corner of is it Avatar? I can't remember the exact location there. Avatar, yes. And she needs the dark, and so if she can get rid of the light in any way, right? That's what the cruelty is what brings her the end goal of like that for her is the place that she wants to be. Anyway,
Well,
maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong.
Wouldn't we say she doesn't need the dark? She produces the dark. She needs the light. She's always hungering for the light, and she's creeping closer and closer to the light. She feeds on it. I focus on the second part of what Dan read.
So does she crave the light because she craves the dark more?
I think she. I mean, the light is clearly some kind of. She has an appetite for it. She eats it,
Yeah.
and then she spins out dark. The problem with eating it is that as she eats the light, she grows larger and larger, so her hunger remains. So she's always. I mean, I found Tolkien's description to be one of like animal appetite, where she's. I mean, as a spider, she's eating. Feeds on the light. She has a need for it, but she hates it at the same time because she is a creature of darkness. So it's this weird parasitic relationship where she requires the light, but she is the opposite of the light. She is totally other than the light. And then without any light to feed upon, her future is dim, as we will find out in the next chapter.
Dim? Did you say dim? Great.
Yeah, dad jokes are a specialty.
The line, I think the first line he uses where it talks about how the light was sucked up is, I don't know. Here's the line. There she sucked up all light that she could find in the mountains, in the cleft of Avatar. There she sucked up all the light that she could find and spun it forth again. So somehow the light transformed inside her and she spun it forth again in dark nets of strangling gloom until no light more could come to her abode and she was famished. Which is true, yeah. I'm having trouble reconciling her desire for the light. Does she desire darkness, or does darkness just the byproduct of her desire of the light?
I think it's a byproduct. We see it when she, and so as we're moving through the chapter, her big act in this chapter, her most important act, is not just to cloak Melkor and get him into the Blessed Land and into Valinor and Aman, but to kill and drain the two trees.
Right.
So when she drains these two trees, and then she drains all the wells of Varda, which are these massive lakes of light. So she keeps growing and then sprouting, just spewing darkness around her. It doesn't. It says it's of malice, so there's an intention there, but it doesn't. But it also seems to be kind of a function that she has, where basically, like the passage you read, where she drinks the light and then she spins webs of darkness, and then she needs more light. So she's an original despoiler. She takes the good and she spoils it, literally and physically in her body, and spits it out as corrupt darkness. And I found fascinating the description of the light itself, the darkness rather itself, that she makes, because it says, and this is near the end of the chapter. But the darkness that followed was more than a loss of light. In that hour was made a darkness that seemed not a lack, which is the nature of darkness. Normal darkness is a lack of light, but a thing with being of its own, for it was indeed made by malice out of light, and it had the power to pierce the eye and enter the mind and heart and mind and strangle the very will. So it is a physical and psychic force. This darkness.
Isn't that in the same way that the light of the two trees is a physical force? It is like it drips, and so they have the wells of Varda that gather that, and so it's like she's the inverse of it.
It's
Whereas
it's not
normally
described.
I was going to say normally we would say that darkness is the absence of light, but here darkness is actually a thing of its own.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's called unlight. It's a thing.
Yeah, right. Is that what he says in here? Unlight?
Yeah, unlight.
And that's the cloak of darkness she weaves around her and Melkor. A cloak of darkness she
Yeah.
wove about them when Melkor and Ungoliant set forth an unlight in which things seemed to
Yes.
be no more, and which eyes could not pierce, for it was void.
She's
So
such a weird character because I think there's nothing else quite like her in that I know of that I can remember offhand in any of the Silmarillion, and yet in the same way that there's an argument over over Balrogs have wings. What is Ungoliant? Is she a Maiar? Is she part
yes,
of creation? Is she like an Ent?
the one time it gives us a clue is in this chapter, so we should read it. And it says, "The Eldar knew not whence she came, but some have said that in ages long before she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda." So this is the outside, above the world. She descends from the darkness that lies about. When Melkor first looked down in envy upon the kingdom of Manwë, and in the beginning she was one of those that he corrupted to his service.
It's true. It's not explicit though that what exactly she is, because in the
Correct.
same way, right? You have the Ents and the Eagles, right? What are the Avar the I can't remember exactly what the Quendi names were, but you have these other beings too. Could she be a separate type of spirit other than Maiar?
Well,
No, she's
here's
not
the
Valar, I
interesting
don't
thing.
think.
She could be in one sense, but we're given classification. Like there's spirits that enter the world, and they enter in different times, and usually the Valar were the greatest and came first, but then the Maiar came as well, and then we have the time like you referenced where the eagles the
Yeah,
spirits came down into the eagles and into the Ents. She seems to be of that type of that sort where she came down not in the beginning but at another time a little later on. But what's interesting to me is what was she like before she was corrupted? Because it says she was corrupted by Melkor, so she was
yeah,
clearly something with goodness in her, and she wasn't just this void and this parasitic being, and she was corrupted.
it's true.
So that it's fascinating. Obviously, what we haven't said in all this is what should be obvious to our viewers who have read Lord of the Rings and maybe reading this for the first time, which is there is obviously a clear connection between her and Shelob. The
Right.
but that connection will become clearer as we read a little bit more. But yes, that she is distinctly different from Shelob. Shelob does not spin webs of darkness that suck up all light. Her webs are very physical and sticky, and they're spiders' webs. There is a darkness about Shelob, but it's not this kind of darkness. It's not where he sucks up light and then grows larger, and sucks up light and grows larger and hungrier. That's a very Ungoliant thing only.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about Ungoliant, you keep reading, she disowned her own master, that's Melkor, desiring to be mistress of her own lust, taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. So there's something about her that feels empty, like it's just never full, never satisfied. And so you get the idea, like if she had her way, she would just suck up everything that's light in the entire world, so that she'd be living in a land of darkness where there'd be no more light for her to suck up. So she would be creating her own famine, I guess. Like she's not creating a world that would be good for her to eat anymore. Like
Yeah.
she'd have nothing left. Like she'd just be empty at the end.
Her prospects are pretty bleak. She is not a creature that.
It makes me wonder if she was in a way she could be related to Varda, where Varda created the stars and the light was most revered by the elves, and in that she revered the light so much, but when Melkor corrupted her, she hated it but yearned for it at the same time. So that emptiness, the emptiness of the struggle within her, created that hunger for it, and it was just expelled and never sated it. Right. So maybe that's it. I like that idea.
Yeah, I like that explanation. It's good. It's as good as any, and I'll go with that one.
And better than most. No.
better than most. Not that I've had a lot of discussions about
No,
the
I
nature of Ungoliant, but she is
Yeah.
she's an odd character in very unique.
What's great about Ungoliant is if you did this right, you could have the first Disney movie, which is she's the villain, and then you have the second Disney movie where she becomes the villain because she was corrupted by somebody else.
Well, no, it explains it so that she's actually the good
Exactly.
the good person, right?
It's Snow White first, It's Cinderella first, and then or Sleeping Beauty first, and then Maleficent, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah.
And
You
then
just see it from their point of view, you know.
Exactly.
101
Right. That'll be Amazon's next TV show.
They've done it
Ungoliant, the misunderstood. Sorry, what?
They've done it a few times, right? They've done.
They have
101 Dalmatians, and then Cruella after that.
Yeah. Everybody's got daddy issues or some other family issues that create these major problems within themselves that make them evil, and it's a sad thing.
Yep. So in this chapter, the basic plot of this chapter is Melkor and Ungoliant together sneak into Valinor while everyone is partying, and it was interesting that he explains how the party comes about. Why is the festival happening? And it's kind of artificial in a way. I mean, it's ultimately natural, but it's natural in the Valar created natural way, where Yavanna sets this time for fruits and flowering, and then whenever there's the cycle of first fruits comes around again, they have the world's greatest party, perhaps the world's only party. Who knows? And then
it's a harvest festival.
They're all in one place. And we have the obligatory Tolkien paragraph where people are singing, because everyone sings in Tolkien's world. And in that time, we're also told that that Manwë calls all the elves, but he commands Fëanor to come as well. And then there's this sort of awkward reconciliation with Fingolfin, which is pretty one-sided. And,
I wouldn't call it a reconciliation, more of an absolution for Fingolfin. Like he's absolving himself of any further problems in his relationship with Fëanor.
Yeah, I mean, he says he releases Fëanor. He says, "I release thee and remember no grievance." So
yes, right.
So he's trying to explain to Fëanor, or make it known that he holds no grudge.
Right.
That's
and not only that, doesn't hold no grudge, but tells Fëanor, "I will follow you. You will be king. I am not going to be the High King of the Noldor. It will be you, Fëanor." And
right. He's answering the lie that Fëanor believed about him.
Right. And Fëanor's answer was, "I hear thee. So be it." But they did not know the meaning of their words, that their words would bear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then, at that moment, yet another failure.
Well, and let's go back a second too, because Fëanor didn't come there of his own accord.
No,
right? He came. He was the only one commanded by Manwë to come, and he was the one who was not dressed in any raiment, in any ornament, no silver, no gems. He left the Silmarils, as we will find out later, locked in his iron cage in Formenos. Yeah, so he comes and he doesn't bring anything, and he's there without any desire at all whatsoever. Well, but that leaves the rest of Tuna and all the city is empty. Everyone is there with Manwë on Taniquetil, right? Did I get that right?
That is correct.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, sorry. I wanted to make sure we all understood that Fëanor didn't want to be there. He is not. He made himself unwelcome.
And he makes it very clear that he doesn't want to be there in all the ways you described.
Exactly, yes.
And so he reminds me of the guy that's like forced to go to church with his family. It's like glowering in the back.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
So anyway, at that moment, Melkor, turns out he has a spear. We didn't know that, but anyway, he takes his spear, and I think this is the first time his spear is mentioned in the entire book. Mm-hmm. And he smites the trees, and that allows Ungoliant to stick her black beak in and drink them all dry, kill the two trees, and they grow larger and larger, so large, and swelled to a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor was afraid. So she drinks not only the sap of the trees, but all the wells of Arda, which, if our readers remember, are these lakes of the dews, the liquid light that has been gathered from the dews of Telperion and Laurelin. And so, yep. So now that there's no more light, all of a sudden someone hits the light switch. And not only that, but the physical darkness that begins that issues from Ungoliant, that covers the land, is a living thing and pierces the eye and enters the heart and mind and strangles the will. So and then they rush off. And it says, interestingly, Manwë is the only one that can see through the darkness. Even this physical darkness, not just the lack of light from the loss of the two trees, but the physical darkness of Ungoliant cannot stop Manwë. So he can pierce the darkness, even that darkness with his gaze. So he sees a darkness beyond dark, and moving huge and vast to the north. So he knows that that's the way that Melkor must have gone. And the first light that comes into being after that is the hooves
I love that.
of Nahar from Orome's pursuit. Orome jumps on his horse, and they set off with with his host. It is interesting that it's not just Orome; he has his own host of one would presume Maiar, but
Hunters.
perhaps of elves as well. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
That travel with him, but they all go running off after. And like before, they fail to find Melkor because this is my list I'm making now. I'm keeping count of all the ways the Valar are failing. And whenever Melkor comes, I mean, it's starting to get a little silly.
I can't wait for the special episode podcast when we go over Michael's list of why never to trust the Valar.
It is interesting, right? Because the Valar are the most powerful beings of good, forces for good in the world. They are supernatural in the classic sense. You know, they're almost the gods of Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're more like angelic beings, as we know because there is only one god in Tolkien's world. But they keep making mistakes when it comes to Melkor. They keep failing. They don't understand him. They give him a mercy when they shouldn't. They trust him when they shouldn't. They chase him and fail to find him. They fail to put a guard around their land. They only put it up north where they failed to find him, so that he's able to get in during the festival. And then they chase after him again. And we have this crazy scene where they can't find him, and Tulkas is standing there waving his arms in the air, beating the air with his fists, And then apparently they go home, and we'll find out in the next chapter they just sort of sit around. They not only they combine tactically inept decisions, but they combine that with now we're going to sit and wait and think about all this darkness that comes to us. And
they're waiting for Atreyu to come defeat the Nothing.
All right,
Dan, is that over your head? Sorry,
yeah,
that was the never-ending story. Okay, that's what I just I've
got some homework. I've got some homework, I guess.
Dating myself and Michael a little bit more than you. Sorry.
So it is not. Tolkien's telling us something about the Valar, I think, here, which is really interesting, and he's sort of highlighting their weakness. They're not perfect beings. They make mistakes, and they make quite a few of them in regards to their reactions to Melkor. They never seem to get it. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a resolution to their relationship with Melkor, but it's going to come at great cost.
Isn't it interesting then, kind of riffing on your idea here of when the Valar make mistakes is, again, they have forced someone to do something, right? They haven't guided, like we'd say Gandalf guided the peoples of Middle-earth, but they've forced Feanor to come and to be a part of this party. And as we'll see, because they forced him in that way, that leads to some big issues down the road. And so then again, right, then other failure of Valar really is Manwë commanding Feanor to come to this event and leaving Formenos, which we'll see. I think the next
doesn't
chapter
turn out well. They have a lot of power and a lot of wisdom, I guess, of some kind. I mean, they helped create the world with their music and their stewardship, but they have a lot of flaws, and it comes out time and time again. So that's what I got.
Yeah.
It is a couple interesting points, but go ahead. Yep.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say one of the not odd things, but one of the unusual things about this chapter, just details. Melkor, upon appearing to Ungoliant, takes on the form of a Dark Lord, because remember he's traveled unseen and then at that point, from then on out, he's locked into that form. He no longer. So from here, for the rest of the Silmarillion, he is locked into his Dark Lord form and cannot change it anymore. So,
and that was the one point I was going to bring up is, why is that? Is it because at this point he has so committed himself to the evil that he is incapable of changing, or is it in a sense, the fear that he has is now because of the fear he's unable to recast himself in a beautiful raiment outside of his Dark Lord appearance.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a third option, but I'm not going
Oh
to talk
yeah.
about it till next chapter
Okay.
because it
Okay.
requires what we learn in next chapter for my theory. But it is interesting to note that from here on out he's locked into his Dark Lord form.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, we already mentioned the Unlight, which is a parallel to the Dews of Telperion and Laureline in its physicality. Um, and then there's a really interesting one that I had never noticed in my previous half dozen times reading the Silmarillion this time, which is that, and credit to you, Jonathan, for the audiobook, because I'm before each of our podcasts, I both read it and then I listen to it as well, because sometimes I miss things in the reading and vice versa in the listening. So,
Audiobook will be linked in the show notes.
yep. But the audiobook called this to my mind. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then at the very beginning of the next chapter, it confirms what I thought was interesting. And this is when the lights go out. So the lights of Telperion and Laureline go out, and then there's all this darkness, right? And then it says something really interesting. It says there was. I'm going to read a couple of the sentences. There was silence in Valinor. No sound could be heard, save only from afar. There came on the wind through the pass of the mountains the wailing of the Teleri, like the cold cry of gulls. So remember, these are the one group of elves who are not on the mountain because they're out on their island.
Totally say.
Tolresea, yeah, Erisea,
Yeah.
that is a island out in the bay. Um, for it blew chill from the east in that hour, and the vast shadows of the sea were rolled against the wall of the shore. So not only do we have this darkness coming from within Valinor, just the lack of light first, then the physical darkness from Ungoliant, but now there's these shadows of the vast shadows of the sea rolled against the walls of the shore, which is totally interesting because like there's darkness from another direction, which is the ocean, which is one of these always these mysterious forces in the elves, in the life of elves. And then I'm going to cheat and read to you one sentence from the next chapter because it's the first paragraph of the next chapter. So I'm going to cheat because it bears on this point. And it says, "But the stars of Varda now glimmered overhead, and the air was clear, for the winds of Manwë had driven away the vapors of death and rolled back the shadows of the sea." So these shadows from the sea are the elves aren't just assailed by the darkness from Ungoliant, but there's these other forces where actual darkness is coming in from a
Yeah.
totally new direction, which is fascinating to me. I hadn't realized that before. It seems to me to represent the danger that's always in the ocean for the elves, not just their
Yeah,
master.
and you could say that the darkness that Ungoliant and Melkor are creating are also drawing in the other dark things of the world.
Oh, that's good. Didn't think of that. That's good.
In the same way that Orome would hunt those dark things in Middle Earth, and now there is less fear of the Valar because there is the darkness, right? There is no more light. There's an undark. There, I would guess there are still stars unless you're within that unlight, but that's it. There's no more. There's no more vast lamps, vast lights, vast trees
Yeah.
to cast over Middle Earth. Yeah, that was one of my favorite lines of the whole chapter, which is that line: there was silence in Valinor, and no sound could be heard save only from afar. There came on the wind through the pass of the mountains the wailing of the Teleri, like the cold cry of gulls. It's creepy and eerie. I think of this as from a cinematic standpoint, and it would be frightening. I think that's one of the things we talked about in the Babylon Bee reads a lot, Dan, is that somehow like when you think about how Tolkien described these things, he had a lot of the vision of what he had was was overwhelming at times, and it would create great stories on the screen when done well. And I think even here it can be done as long as you respect it and don't start changing things randomly, like some certain large corporations might be doing with one of their upcoming TV shows. However, I really like the idea like this chapter. I think there's a lot to this chapter that you could create an amazing visual representation of this here. and inject it with a lot of fear and a lot of trembling as it.
I
moves
agree,
forward.
and I'm gonna add on to that a theme which I think is really important, both for the Rings of Power as well as for us to pay attention to as we read through the Silmarillion. One of the things that people um, frequently that can be missed. Let me put it this way: relatability in storytelling in movies is held in extremely high regard, and where the characters in your film or TV series are supposed to be relatable, and you're supposed to connect them to the. I think actually this is one of the reasons, the side reasons, not just for the dollar signs flashing around hobbits, but it's one of the reasons that they kept hobbits with the Rings of Power series, is because there's
Mhm.
the hobbits are or are supposed to be. I mean, crazy festival costumes aside from our last look through, they're supposed to be among the more relatable. Hobbits are a relatable piece of Lord of the Rings, where even though they are technically they're not human, but we relate to the hobbits more than we do to other people in the Lord of the Rings. It's really interesting. So I understand that view. However, one of the differences in the Silmarillion is that the Silmarillion is all about a different race entirely. It's about the race of elves. I mean, yes, it has men and dwarves in it, and other beings, Maiar and Valar, but it's
Mhm.
mostly a tale about the elves. And one of the interesting things about the Silmarillion, and one of the things that needs to be captured, and I love how this line actually leads me in my own imagination to touch on this theme, is that the elves are inherently non-human. They're inherently unrelatable. There are things that Fëanor is going to do, and the people are going to and his people are going to follow him into, which we should not understand very well. It should be tragic and strange, and there should be something of an air of mystery about this. And the wailing of the Teleri is a small taste of that in this way. Wails so eerie and long that you can hear it all the way through across the bay into the through the mountains and up into the tall. Like this is something very odd, and the elves have plenty of those moments throughout the
Mhm.
Silmarillion, and I think does a disservice to Tolkien's work for us to try to humanize them too much. There's something alien about elves that we need to
Mhm.
latch
Mhm.
onto.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't buy the whole notion that you can't you have to make somebody in a film or other creative endeavor that you can relate to make it an effective tale. Right? There's you
Absolutely not.
because you can always relate to parts. That goes back to the whole idea like if you can't see it, you can't be it that we talked about in one of our videos. Like no, that's not true. I can identify with certain parts of certain people in certain ways that make me feel emotionally connected to them. They don't have to represent me directly. That's what they say about Star Wars, for instance, with Luke Skywalker. Right, he's the guy that we can all sort of understand that we understand his longing and the saving the princess. Right, that whole thing. Right, the hero with 1,000 faces. But
Yeah.
I think there's more to it than that, and it dumbs it down when that's your goal in every story that you tell is to try
Right,
and
right.
create a character
And
that
there's
you
a
have to
spectrum.
identify with.
There's a spectrum of dumbness that you can do. That you can reach. And I think that when we were reviewing some of those, that like the quotes from Lenny, what's his last name?
Lenny Henry.
Lenny Henry, that's about as dumb as it gets, because that's the I can't relate to a skin color, which is the shallowest of things, and therefore I can't. If you can't see it, then you can't be it. Um, I'm even talking farther down the spectrum. I think that the elves of the Silmarillion are unrelatable in this interesting, mysterious way, a number of ways, but they're also compelling, and there's
Mhm.
aspects of them that we can find similarity with,
Yeah.
that are fascinating, along with their alienness. They're alien, and I one of the things I really hope from the Lord of the Rings of Power. I don't know how much my hope is going to be fulfilled, but it is one of the things I would hope for anyone making a second age tale is capturing the difference between what elves feel like and what humans feel like, and on screen, elves should
Mhm.
feel very, very different. This should not be. And I'm afraid with the Arondir character, they're just trying to make it like an elf you can relate to, and
Yeah.
and that's I think you're going to
Hmm.
fail if you do it that way. Anyway,
I agree. I agree. Yeah, and if you want to hear more about that, check out our YouTube channel. You can watch our videos there and see what we think about some of these new characters, these new um, the way they're portraying the races now in Amazon's Rings of Power. All
yeah,
right, final call. Last thoughts?
Dan, you've been talking to
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Yeah, I had one last thought. Something that reminded me of something from Lord of the Rings. That even though there are waves of darkness in Tolkien's writings, that it's light versus dark, and sometimes the darkness seems very dark. Even this chapter, it ends with a little bit of light. It says, "Then the pursuit was begun, and the earth shook beneath the horses of the host of Orome. And the fire that was stricken from the hooves of Nahar was the first light that returned to Valinor." So just there's a little bit of light still, and I thought that was interesting. That even though this is a very dark chapter, it's called of the darkening of Valinor. That even at the end, they're still good. There's still activity. There's still a spark of light at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. But Great. The bigger question is what kind of horseshoes did they use on Nahar? Right. Because the sparks, they come metal, rock. It's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, but there's still just a little bit of hope.
Yeah. So maybe we'll read the next chapter, and that'll just be all thrown out the window. But I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Any final thoughts, Michael? I know you and I've been.
I said too much probably. So okay. I'm looking forward to how the flight of the Noldor, or
yes,
how Fëanor screws his entire race.
Oh, goodness. It's kind of true. But before we go into that next week, we do want to end on
If You Like Tolkien.
And today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Book of Lost Tales, which is book 1. There's a part 2 too, in addition to this one here. And this is the first of the histories of Middle-earth that was released. Let's see, 1980 something, 81 or 82. I'm guessing. I know Unfinished Tales was 1980. Let's see. I'm leafing through the book here, and I'm going to find out for you. It is 1983, actually. So first one of the histories of Middle-earth. And this takes the first cosmology that Tolkien wrote for Middle-earth and kind of puts it in a fashion of like where you can kind of see what his initial beginnings of this were. I think he was 27 or 28 when most of this was written, somewhere around there in the late 20s. And Christopher Tolkien, he talks about how hard it was to compile the information in here into something that was cohesive because the notes were scattered in different notebooks. Sometimes his mother apparently rewrote some of Tolkien's notes into a far more legible notebook. But a lot of this here is different than the Silmarillion, but you can see where he got a lot of the ideas for it from. And it's actually more complex in here too. It's sort of the place where he discusses all the differences between the elves and between the who are actually far. I mean, their whole creation story or the whole migration story isn't even there anymore. And anyway, it's not really like reading another version of the Silmarillion. It's sort of like reading the first draft because you can tell Tolkien wasn't as good of a writer at this point either. When he was writing this. But again, he was 27, 28 and hadn't gone through all the revisions. This was the first time that he actually tried to put down his ideas on here. But it's really interesting. And if you can get through it, give it a shot. It can get a little bit dry at times because there's a lot of naming and renaming, and Christopher Tolkien puts in notes about who's who and who eventually became who and things like that. And I think they're even, speaking of our episode today, even Ungoliant is in here. And I can't remember the name, but it's similarly different. So it starts with Ungol, I think, and then comes into something else. But if you're really interested in how Tolkien came up with the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, then start with the Book of Lost Tales Part 1, and you can shoot for heading through all 12. It's kind of a Robert Jordan-esque task in front of you to go through 12 books, but I think take a break and read another easy fiction book if you want to in the meantime to kind of like give your brain a break and then go on to the next book. Highly recommended if you can do it. I think you've read this too, Michael.
Yes, they remind me a little bit of my studies, late medieval, early Renaissance. There are people that study, for example, all the early manuscripts of Shakespeare. Like,
Yeah.
how was, what's the first version of Henry V, and as you go through the versions and you see the tale unfold.
Interesting.
There's a fascination. It does take a true sort of a different kind of Tolkien nerd to really love that stuff. So it's a different kind of read, even from the Silmarillion.
These are people listening to us going through the Silmarillion at a snail's pace at 40 minutes per episode. So
They are our people, so they might like it.
our kinds of people, for sure. All right. So Dan, one day when in 6 years, when we're done through all the other ones, we can go through the Book of Lost Tales.
All right. I'll be here for it. Lord willing.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. I know this one went a little bit longer than usual, but we appreciate having so many listeners already. Like it's a little bit humbling. It's nice to see, but we thank you for listening. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. And also, we could use some 5-star reviews. We've got a few, but the more the merrier. Helps us find more Tolkien fans, kind of increase the community. You can check us out on YouTube, like I mentioned. Go to theonering.com/YouTube. You go straight to our channel. You can subscribe there, see the additional videos that we're posting about the Rings of Power and anything else that pops up in our head. You can follow us on Twitter. Our username is Torc, T-O-R-C, which is for theonering.com, T-O-R-C. And we're glad to have you along. So next week, we're on to chapter 9, right? Yes, of The Flight of the Noldor.
That's right.
A little bit of a longer one, but we're getting into the meat of it, and I'm excited to really start looking at all these characters and finding out how they become who they become. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Michael, Dan, and Jonathan want to thank you, the listener, for joining us. Visit us at theonering.com, your source for everything Tolkien, where you can comment on this episode and join the conversation. This is Austin Robertson, bidding you farewell. May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.